Hello, and welcome to episode 36 of Sarastro's Marvel Crisis Protocol painting series. In this episode I'll be painting Apocalypse from the Marvel Crisis Protocol miniatures game by Atomic Mass Games. For this figure I wanted to create a subtly grungy and battle-worn finish, and will be employing the use of some stippling along with an oil wash and some attractive glowing effects on the back to help achieve the finished look. Let's begin. The figure actually comes with a beautifully sculpted temple base, but I chose to create more of an urban apocalyptic look in keeping with the terrain I like to play on. I'm using this spare Immortal Hulk base as my starting point, but you could of course use whichever base you like. I'm first using some green stuff to ensure he has a firm, even surface to stand on. And then simply building up a bunch of random debris along with some basing paste and bits of rocky scatter. These are some O-scaled bricks I bought on Etsy. And this is a spare newspaper vending machine which I'm embedding into some milliput. Once I'm happy, we can go ahead and prime both the figure and the base in black. I chose not to add any zenithal highlights to Apocalypse himself, but brightened up the base with some grey. I also hit the figure with a matte varnish as the primer was pretty glossy, and we're now ready to begin painting. I'm going to start with the blue armour, where I've taken inspiration from the grim dark work of one of my favourite painters, Richard Gray. To establish a subtle bit of texture, I'm going to begin by stippling on the base tone with a dry brush, using a mix of dark blue and blue. I'm first unloading some of the paint, and I'm then simply dabbing the paint on, keeping the brush perpendicular to the surface of the Mini, with no horizontal movement at all. This way we can create some quite fine textures, and if we build the tone up in a couple of layers, we can also begin creating a sense of volume. I actually forgot to paint the gauntlets at this point, but we'll come back to them in a while. I'm now going to provide some broad highlights to the armour by lightening the base tone with some grey-blue. And to speed things along, I'll be using the Airbrush for this, so here I'm thinning the paint with some water mixed with a little flow enhancer. Naturally, I'm applying this from a roughly overhead angle. Ideally, we want some of the textures we created a moment ago to still show through. I'm now using some pure grey blue quite sparingly for the brightest spots. And here I'm painting the gauntlets which I missed earlier. I felt I went a little too broad with the grey-blue, so here I'm just toning down some of the shadow to mid-tones with a thinned dark blue. Next I'm painting the tabard using the same range of blues, but this time with the brush to allow me to create a different textural feel. I'm doing quite a free bit of wet blending here. And I find that for the highlights, by keeping the brush moving horizontally across the direction the fabric is hanging gives quite a pleasing look. Moving on to the bodysuit or skin, I'm using a mix of dark neutral grey and neutral grey, tinted with a little dark purple. Before painting the face, I'm going to first draw in the eyes using pure white. We can then trim them back using black to get exactly the size and shape we're after. I'm now going to brush over some fluorescent tones, and I'm using a mix of dark red and red-orange for that. I'm kind of brushing this over the whites of the eyes and hitting the surrounding area as I go. We can now continue painting the skin. And let's not forget the neck area. I'm now mixing some khaki with the grey and using this to pick out the teeth. And I'm also returning to the blue tones to articulate the thin piping around the mouth. Finally, I'm switching to the slightly more satin Scalecolor paint to paint the remaining metalwork, where I'm using black mixed with some Prussian Blue to form the base tone for a non-metallic metal approach. You may prefer to save time here by using a metallic tone, of course, perhaps followed with a wash and a few highlights. You could also go for a more golden or bronzish look for some of these details if you like. I'm also doing some black lining to help with the definition. now going to highlight all of the grey areas, extending the brightness with some bright neutral grey mixed into the base tone, once again with a hint of dark purple mixed in. A bit like with the tabard, I favour short horizontal strokes for vertically aligned volumes like this. This is as bright as I'd like to go for now, and I'm preserving these brighter levels mainly for the face. As usual, you can be as smooth or as sketchy as you like. Next I'm going to provide some non-metallic metal style highlights to all of the metallic details by simply adding increasing amounts of white to the black and Prussian blue base tone. I'm enjoying some nice scratchy textures along the way, and you could be as smooth or noisy as you like when painting metallic areas like this. I'm initially treating these tentacle-like connectors as two large volumes, using quite a large brush to place the midtones. We can then go in with some brighter highlights for the edges. Finally, I'm going to further highlight the blue armour, where I want to ensure all of the edges are nicely defined, and I'll also be providing some fine scratches. I'm adding some white to the grey blue for the brightest highlights. Here I'm just using small stipples and scratches to push up the values and texture, building on the volumes already established earlier with the airbrush. For these dome-like structures, we want to bring the highlights to an eventual point. I'd now like to apply an oil wash to provide some shading, but will first brush over a gloss varnish to encourage the wash to flow more smoothly into the recesses. For the wash, I'm using a mix of ivory black and rusty brown. Pretty much any rich brown tone would be fine for this, and I'm thinning the paint right down with an appropriate thinner. I'm now coating most of the figure with this, soaking up the excess as we go. We can also use a cotton bud to gently wipe the wash from the flatter, more upturned areas. I chose to shade the entire figure except for the face, as I don't want to ruin the eyes. And here I'm providing some additional wash around a couple of these joints. Once dry, we can apply a matte varnish, and we can now see how subtle yet effective the wash has been in creating a gently weathered appearance along with a pleasing contrast of colour temperature. The wash has also slightly dulled the highlights however, so I'm now going back in to bring back a little sparkle. I also chose to create a glowing effect for the port or conduit on the back. The general approach for creating this kind of effect is to first apply some pure white to maximise the levels, then apply some fluorescent tones on top. Here I'm using the Hera Models pigments, either with the brush or airbrush. I decided to reapply some white to brighten up the centre. And as I was somewhat heavy-handed with the airbrush, I went back and forth a little to push the fiery tones back. I then chose to apply a more yellowish tone on top, before once again pushing back the coloured lighting in some places, whilst extending it out in others. I'm now switching to the base, where I'm painting quite freely, starting with a white dry brush to sharpen the details, followed with some free wet blending, shading, and additional dry brushing. I went back and forth a little with some of my colour choices, but generally wanted to incorporate some warm orangey tones to complement the blue armour. I'm now gluing Apocalypse to the base before making some final adjustments to the lighting, notably by adding some additional orange glints to the metalwork on the back. I also strengthened the orange levels in the glowing core. I've added some dark lining to punch up the contrast. I'm now cutting out some newspapers to add to the base, and you can find a link to a printable sheet of these in the video description. I'm simply applying a little Mod Podge before folding the paper over and twisting it into a dynamic shape. Next I decided to introduce some dusty weathering for the feet, and I'm going quite orange for this. I'm mainly dusting this on with a dry brush and also hitting some of the surrounding terrain. We can then reapply 1 or 2 highlights on top. And I chose to add a gentle orange-brown cast to the shadows on the torso. I'm now applying my last few highlights, including a final boost to the levels on the face. And this completes Apocalypse. Thank you for joining me. I do hope you found the video useful. As usual, you can find a paint and product list in the video description, along with all of the places I can be found online. My very special thanks as always go out to my amazing patrons for funding this work. If you'd like to help me keep going, feel free to hit the Patreon link and pledge what you can. Join me again soon as we continue painting miniatures from Marvel Crisis Protocol. Happy painting!